Welcome to APA Style, a workshop by the Gaston College Writing Center. APA stands for American Psychological Association and is most commonly used in the social sciences. APA avoids using authors' first names so as to remain objective and gender neutral. In addition, there is an emphasis on publication date because the sciences focuses on current research. In this workshop, we will cover APA formatting, parenthetical references, also known as in-text citations, and the final reference list, called the reference page. First, we will cover formatting, both for student and professional APA style papers. APA style papers feature a cover or title page. Shown here is an example of a cover page for a student essay. The page number goes in the upper right corner and should be in the same font as the rest of the cover page and essay. Once you have inserted the page number, it should appear on every page of the document. The next step is adding your title, which should be entered down a few lines from the top. The title should be centered and bolded. Hit enter twice before typing in the rest of the information for the cover page. The remaining components will be centered and double-spaced, each on their own line, including the student's name, the name of the college and/or department, the class name and/or number, the instructor's name, and the date of submission. All of this information should be double-spaced and presented in Times New Roman 12-point font with 1-inch margins on all sides. Don't forget to hit enter 3 to 4 times before you type the title. Finally, please note that while Times New Roman 12 is the most common font used in APA-style papers, Calibri 11, Arial 11, and Georgia 11 are also acceptable. Now, we will shift to discussing how to format an APA-style title page for a professionally published paper. Although most instructors will likely focus on the student variation, it is possible they could ask for a professionally formatted paper instead. One element included in the professional version is called the running head, which appears in the upper left corner of the title page and features an abbreviated form of the paper's title, as shown here. If you are ever assigned a professional APA-style paper, the Gaston College Writing Center can help you set this up. Just as in the student version, here the page number goes in the upper right corner of the cover page. This is followed by the title, centered, bolded, and entered down a few lines from the top of the page. Below that comes the author's name, followed by the department and/or institute on the next line down. Hit the spacebar a few times before typing the next components, each on their own line, as follows: class name and/or number, instructor's name, and date of publication. As with a student paper, these elements should be typed in Times New Roman 12-point font, double-spaced, with 1-inch margins on all sides. And again, you will need to hit enter 3 to 4 times before you type the paper's title. Finally, as with a student APA paper, Calibri 11, Arial 11, and Georgia 11 are all acceptable fonts, along with the standard Times New Roman 12. Here are a few quick APA-style formatting tips. Do not use the APA template in Word unless told to do so by your instructor. Many students find it confusing, and it is very difficult to edit or reformat once it has been used. Make sure the entire paper is double-spaced. All paragraphs should be left aligned, with each paragraph indented using the Tab key. Do not add extra spaces between paragraphs. There is a default setting in Word that adds an extra space every time you hit enter, so you will need to turn that feature off. There are 2 more aspects of an APA-style paper we need to go over, and the first one is the abstract. Although the current 7th edition of APA does not require an abstract for student papers, some instructors may still ask for one. An abstract is simply a 1-paragraph summary of your entire essay. If included, it appears alone on the second page of the document, which will have the word abstract centered and bolded at the top of the page. Below that, you will type your 250 words or less summary. Here is an important tip. Do not write the abstract until you have completed the rest of your paper. You can't know what needs to be mentioned in a summary of a paper you haven't written yet. Before we move on to talking about in-text citations, let's talk briefly about one more aspect of APA-style formatting: headings and subheadings. APA allows the use of headings and subheadings to help with organizing your paper. The specific headings you use will depend on the content of your essay, but some of the most common ones, especially for scientific papers, include background, method, results, and discussion. You can even create multiple subheadings under the same section, but the formatting will look different for each. Please visit the APA's website for a full list of heading styles. Now, we will shift our discussion to APA style in-text citations. In-text citations, sometimes referred to as parenthetical references, are an important part of APA and many other citation styles. In their most basic format, they consist of the author or author's last names and year of publication, separated by a comma and placed in parentheses at the end of each sentence that is a quote or paraphrase from an outside source. Here is an example showing that most basic format. Students have a hard time learning new documentation styles like APA, parentheses Southern and Gordon, comma 2003, close parentheses. Notice two aspects of this citation. The ampersand, rather than the word and, is used between the two authors' names, and the period comes after the citation. Now, let's look at some variations on this basic example. If the author's name is in the sentence, list only the year in parentheses after the author's name, as shown here. According to Southern and Gordon, parentheses 2015, students have a hard time learning APA. When paraphrasing from a shorter work, like a newspaper or journal article, the author's names and year of publication are sufficient. However, if you use a direct quote or paraphrase from a longer work, a page or paragraph number must also be included, as shown in this example. According to Southern and Gordon, parentheses 2003, comma, quotation marks, students often had difficulty using APA style, especially when it was their first time. Close quotation marks, parentheses, P period 104, close parentheses. It is important to note that some scientific writing does not allow for the use of direct quotes and instead requires the author to paraphrase content into their own words. If you are assigned an APA-style paper, you may want to ask your instructor if direct quotations are permitted. As shown previously, for a work with two authors, list both authors' last names, separated by an ampersand, followed by a comma and the year of publication. For a work with three or more authors, list only the first author's last name, followed by the Latin phrase et al., et space al period, which means and others, as shown in this example. Parentheses, Leach, et al., period, comma, 2021, close parentheses. Don't forget to include the period that is part of et al. APA style allows writers to treat an organization as the author of a source when no actual author is listed. List the group's name and abbreviation in the first citation. For example, parentheses, World Health Organization, opening bracket, WHO, closing bracket, comma, 2021, closing parentheses. Then, in subsequent citations, use only the abbreviated version. For example, parentheses, WHO, comma, 2021, close parentheses. If a work has no listed author and cannot be attributed to an organization, use the title of the work or an abbreviated version of it in place of the author, as shown in the example here. Parentheses, quotation marks, side effects of insomnia, comma, closing quotation marks, 2021, close parentheses. Typically, you would want to shorten the title if it is more than 4 words long, and you should use italics for book titles and quotation marks for article titles. Please note that it is best practice to use works with established authors as sources for your research papers, as works with listed authors tend to be more credible. Finally, if a work is undated, you must use the abbreviation N period D period, standing in for no date, to indicate that. Cite the source by its title in the signal phrase, or use the first word or two in the parentheses, followed by a comma and N period D period. Here are 2 examples that show both ways of approaching this. Quotation marks, childhood obesity, close quotation marks, parentheses, N period, D period, close parentheses, explains that children struggling to control their weight must also struggle with the pressure of television advertising that, on the one hand, encourages the consumption of junk food, and, on the other hand, celebrates thin celebrities. Or, Children struggling to control their weight must also struggle with the pressure of television advertising that, on the one hand, encourages the consumption of junk food, and, on the other hand, celebrates thin celebrities, parentheses, quotation marks, childhood obesity, comma, close quotation marks, N period, D period, close parentheses. Now, let's move on to talk about the final component of an APA-style paper, the reference page. An APA-style reference page goes hand in hand with the in-text citations, featuring longer versions of those citations with more information. The reference page goes on the last page of your essay and features the word references, bolded and centered at the top of the page. The reference page should be double-spaced. It should be formatted using a hanging indent, meaning that the first line of each entry is not indented, but the lines underneath are. The reference page entries should be in alphabetical order. Per APA guidelines, you can list up to 20 authors' names. However, if the source has 21 or more authors, list the first 19 names, followed by an ellipses, 3 periods, and then the final author's name. For help with formatting in APA style, please visit apastyle.apa.org. Here is the basic format for a reference page entry for a book or ebook with one author. Start with the author's last name, followed by a comma, their first initial, and a period. Next comes the year of publication in parentheses, followed by another period. The book's title comes next, and that goes in italics. If the book is an edition, the edition number indicating that is next, and that goes in parentheses with the abbreviation ED period, as shown here in the example 4th ED period. Place another period after the closing parentheses. Next comes the name of the publisher, followed by a period. And the entry ends with the URL, if applicable. Always hit enter after you are finished typing the URL so that it will be hyperlinked. One thing to note before we move on to another example is that APA has specific rules for capitalization when it comes to the title of a work. Only the first word of the title, the first word of the subtitle, indicated by the presence of a colon separating the main title from the subtitle, and any proper nouns that are part of the title or subtitle should be capitalized. This rule only applies to the title of the work and not the name of the source or publisher, as those would be proper nouns and therefore always capitalized. Now, let's look at an example of how to cite a journal article with one author. Similar to our book example, the entry begins with the author's last name, followed by a comma, their initial, and a period. The year in parentheses comes next, followed by a period. Next will be the article title, with the same capitalization rules as mentioned previously, and you'll type a period after that. The journal title goes next, and you will put that in italics, followed by a comma. Next comes the volume number, and that goes in italics. That is followed by the issue number, which isn't italicized, but does go in parentheses, again followed by a comma. The page numbers come next, separated with a dash and followed by a period. And finally, the hyperlinked URL will end the entry. Next, we will look at an example of a very common source type, a web page. This example has an author, so you would begin the reference page entry in the same way as in the other examples, with the author's last name, followed by a comma, their first initial, and a period. The next component is the date of publication in parentheses. In this case, we have a full date rather than just a year, which goes in the format of year, comma, month, day. Note that, in APA style, the names of months are always spelled out and never abbreviated. Be sure to place a period after the closing parentheses. Next comes the title of the article on the web page, which goes in italics with the same capitalization rules as mentioned previously, followed by a period. The next element is the name of the website, and that will be followed again by a period. End the entry with the hyperlinked URL. Now, we will briefly go over a few other common types of sources that could be used in an APA-style paper. Even though it's generally preferred to use sources with named authors to ensure credibility, you may sometimes find a reliable source that lacks that information, as shown here in the example of an article from a local Charlotte news station. When the source cannot be attributed to an author or author's names, and there is also no organization that could be treated as the author, you will begin the reference page entry with the article title in italics, following APA-style capitalization rules. That is followed by a period, the date of publication in parentheses, and the name of the website, with each element followed by a period. If the source is likely to be updated, as articles from news organizations sometimes are, you will need to next include the word retrieved and the date you first looked at the source, followed by a comma, the word from, and the hyperlinked URL. To cite a chapter in an edited book or ebook, begin the entry as you would any other book, with the chapter author's last name, a comma, their initial or initials, separated by a period if a middle initial is included, a period, the date of publication in parentheses, a period, and the title of the chapter using APA-style capitalization. That information will be followed by the word in, capitalized, and the last names and initials of the editor or editors. Note that those names are not reversed, as the author's names are. Next, you will type a set of parentheses with capital ED period or capital EDS period inside, followed by another period. The title of the book comes next, and it will be italicized and capitalized using APA guidelines. Next comes the chapter's page numbers, and those will be in parentheses, beginning with PP period. Place a period after the closing parentheses, and then type the name of the book's publisher, followed by a period. End the entry with the hyperlinked URL. To cite a government report, begin with the name of a governmental entity that published the report, then type a period, the date of publication in parentheses, and another period. The italicized title of the report comes next, using APA capitalization and followed by a period. End the entry with a hyperlinked URL. Finally, for a source that can be attributed to an organization as the author, begin the entry with the name of the organization. This is followed by a period, the date of publication in parentheses, the title of the article in italics with APA-style capitalization, and the URL, hyperlinked of course. If you need further help with any aspect of APA style, please reach out to make an appointment with the Gaston College Writing Center. We are here to help in any way we can. Purdue University's online writing lab, or Purdue OWL, is also a great source for help with all things APA, as is the American Psychological Association's website. And finally, the APA 7th edition handbook will provide you with many examples of how to cite different types of sources in APA style. Thank you for watching this workshop by the Gaston College Writing Center.